political earthquake nobody saw coming. What if I told you that in just 7 days, a brand new political movement managed to rattle not just the government, but Reform UK as well? What if I told you that over 80,000 people signed up almost overnight? And what if I told you that the political establishment laughed at it until it quietly appeared on the Electoral Commission website? Because that's exactly what just happened. Rupert Lowe has launched Restore Britain.
I have chosen to speak to you today from the farm because places like this represent what proper Britain is about. Hard work, responsibility, effort, duty, stewardship. This is the England I know, and this is the England that I love. On a farm, you don't think in election cycles or headlines or polling. You think in seasons, you think in generations, in what you leave behind to those who come after you.
And whether you love him or loathe him, one thing is undeniable. The system noticed. For weeks, critics dismissed it. It's not registered. It's not real. It's just noise. Well, registrations take time. Bureaucracy takes time. And now, it's there. And that changes the conversation entirely. But this isn't just about one man or one party. This is about something far bigger. It's about information. It's about who reads beyond the headlines and who doesn't. Because here's the uncomfortable truth about modern politics in Britain. Most outrage is manufactured by misunderstanding. We live in a time where one clipped sentence, one edited quote, one viral screenshot can completely distort what someone actually said. And before anyone checks the source, reputations are destroyed. So before we dive into Rupert Lowe, Restore Britain and Reform UK's reaction, we need to talk about something deeper. We need to talk about how change actually happens. Because people constantly ask, how do we fix this country? How do we stop the decline? How do we make politicians listen? The answer isn't dramatic. It's not glamorous. It's not revolutionary. It's simple. You vote, you inform yourself, and you participate. Because here's the reality. Certain communities in this country vote in large numbers every time. They show up, they organise, they take positions, they influence policy. If you don't vote and someone you don't like gets into power, you can be angry, but you can't be surprised. And you can't complain about a system you refuse to participate in. That's why information matters. That's why reading beyond the headline matters. And that's why the rise of Restore Britain is significant. Because whether you agree with Rupert Lowe or not, people are listening. And they're joining. Now, let's zoom out. Because while this new movement was exploding online, something else was happening in the background. Former heads of the army, former heads of the navy, former MI6 officials, senior military figures. They issued an open letter accusing the government under Keir Starmer of not being honest with the British public about defence spending. That's not a minor disagreement. That's a direct challenge to credibility. The government claimed it was increasing defence investment. The former military chiefs said the figures were being presented in a misleading way. Downing Street responded by saying the reports were misinterpreted. But here's the pattern people are noticing. Misinterpretation, clarification, reframing, U-turn, move on. It's becoming a cycle. And this is where frustration builds. Because many voters feel like the big picture is being missed. They see enormous energy spent on niche issues. While core concerns, national security, borders, economic stability, funds feel secondary. Now, at the same time, we've seen high-profile free speech cases. An employment tribunal ruled that a Christian social worker could not lawfully lose his job for holding traditional beliefs on marriage and sexuality. Pause for a moment. When did that even become controversial? When did holding a belief, without harassing anyone, without breaking any laws, become grounds for dismissal? And why did it take legal battles to correct it? Then there's the NHS spending over £600,000 of taxpayer money arguing that biological males should be allowed in female changing rooms in a hospital dispute. Regardless of where you stand on gender identity debates, the public reaction wasn't subtle. People asked, is this really where public money should be going? And when these cases pile up, free speech rose, workplace policies, controversial spending, something shifts in public perception. It's not about one incident, it's about accumulation. And into that atmosphere steps Rupert Lowe. Not quietly, not cautiously, but directly. And when he began speaking about identity, immigration, and what he calls systemic failure, some people cheered, others panicked. But one thing is certain, he didn't whisper. He challenged the narrative head on. And that's where part 2 gets explosive. Because what he said about young white men, about deportation, about national identity, has now triggered backlash, not just from the government, but from Reform UK itself. And when opposition parties start fighting each other before a general election, you know something serious is happening. The moment Rupert Lowe stopped talking in generalities and started speaking in specifics, the temperature changed. This wasn't just another politician criticising the government. This wasn't another generic speech about taking back control. This was something sharper and far more controversial. Lowe began speaking about demographic change, about identity, about what he described as the loss of cultural confidence. And then came the line that detonated the conversation. He argued that young white British men were being told they were the problem, that they were the cause of society's ills, and that this narrative was dangerous. Now, instantly, critics responded. They accused him of stoking division. They said he was playing identity politics. They warned that this rhetoric risks deepening social fractures. But here's where things became complicated, because many ordinary voters, quietly, said something else. Why are some groups allowed to be defended, but others aren't? That question may be uncomfortable, but it's real. And politics today is increasingly about uncomfortable questions. Then came immigration. Lowe didn't use soft language. He spoke about deportations, about enforcement, about reversing what he called a failure of border sovereignty. He argued that Britain's asylum and migration systems have become so overwhelmed that they are no longer functioning in the national interest. Now, whether you agree with him or not, that's a debate. But here's the political reality. Immigration is consistently one of the top voter concerns in Britain. And when someone addresses it bluntly, without caveats, without careful phrasing, it cuts through. But it also triggers resistance, because the establishment fears absolutes, and the media fears simplicity. Yet here's where the real shock came. The backlash didn't just come from Labour. It didn't just come from commentators. It came from Reform UK itself. And that's when the story stopped being about one man and started becoming about a movement. Because Reform UK, the party long associated with insurgent politics, appeared uncomfortable with the direction of Lowe's tone. There were reports of internal friction, whispers about discipline, concerns about messaging. Now let's be clear. Political parties always manage their public image carefully. But when a party built on anti-establishment energy begins policing its own insurgent voices, questions start forming. Is this about strategy? Is this about optics? Or is this about fear? Because here's the truth few are saying out loud. The British political landscape is shifting. The two-party system still dominates, but public trust is thinner than it has been in decades. Many voters feel politically homeless. They distrust Labour. They distrust the Conservatives. And they're not entirely sure reform represents what it once did. That vacuum creates opportunity. And opportunity creates tension, especially on the right, because when movements fragment, they weaken. And when they compete for the same voter base, they cannibalize each other. So now we have three forces colliding. A Labour government under pressure over defence and cultural issues. A Reform UK party trying to balance rebellion with credibility. And Rupert Lowe launching Restore Britain into that chaos. This isn't just personality politics. It's structural. It's about who speaks for disillusioned voters. It's about who defines the narrative of national identity. And it's about whether blunt rhetoric wins elections or merely wins headlines. Now let's step back for a moment. Because while this debate explodes online, something quieter is happening in the country. Energy bills remain high, cost of living pressures haven't vanished, public services are stretched. People aren't arguing about political philosophy at the supermarket checkout. They're asking whether they can afford another price rise. And this is the risk for every political movement focused on identity. If it doesn't connect to economic reality, it stalls. If it doesn't translate anger into policy, it fizzles. So the question now isn't whether Rupert Lowe can grab attention. He already has. The question is whether Restore Britain becomes a structured political force, or just another moment of online fury. Because British politics has seen many flare-ups before. Movements that surged, movements that trended, movements that felt inevitable, until they weren't. Is it accelerating a realignment? Or are we witnessing the early signs of something much bigger than one party or one personality? Because if voters are truly searching for an alternative, then the next election won't just be about left versus right. It will be about establishment versus disruption. And that is where things become unpredictable. So here we are, not with a tidy conclusion, not with a clear winner, but with something far more significant, a fracture. Because what's unfolding right now isn't just a disagreement between Rupert Lowe and Reform UK. It isn't just criticism of Keir Starmer. It isn't even about one new party called Restore Britain. It's about something deeper. It's about whether Britain is entering a period of political realignment. For decades, British politics has operated like a pendulum. Labour, Conservative, back and forth, occasionally disrupted, never replaced. Even insurgent movements have eventually been absorbed, neutralised, or faded away. But what happens when distrust stops being partisan? What happens when voters aren't just angry at one party, but at the entire structure? Because that's the mood that seems to be growing. You can hear it in conversations, you can see it in polling volatility, you can feel it in turnout fatigue. There's a sense that politics has become performance. Prime Minister's questions looks theatrical. Press conferences feel scripted. Debates feel rehearsed. And for many voters, authenticity now matters more than ideology. That's why blunt rhetoric resonates. Not because it's polished, but because it feels unscripted. And that's the risk and the opportunity for movements like Restore Britain. If they remain raw and direct, they attract energy. But if they lack discipline and structure, they collapse under scrutiny. Now, let's look at the strategic reality. If the right fragments, Labour benefits. That's basic arithmetic. Under the UK's first-past-the-post system, splitting votes in key constituencies can hand victory to candidates who don't command majority support. So, if Reform UK and Restore Britain compete for the same voter base, Labour doesn't need to win bigger, it just needs the opposition to divide. And that's why internal tensions matter, because political passion without unity is politically inefficient. But here's where it gets interesting. What if this isn't fragmentation? What if it's evolution? Political movements often go through moments of rupture before consolidation. New leadership, new branding, new identity. The old guard resists, the base demands more, the direction shifts, and sometimes, out of that chaos, something stronger emerges. The question is whether that's what we're witnessing now, or whether this is simply the right tearing itself apart. Meanwhile, Labour faces its own pressures. Defence spending debates, cultural flashpoints, economic strain, public scepticism. When former military leaders publicly challenge government transparency, that's not trivial. When cultural debates dominate headlines while household finances remain tight, that's not incidental. Voters are weighing all of it. And here's the truth politicians rarely admit. Most people aren't ideologues. They don't wake up thinking about political theory. They think about safety, security, opportunity, stability. If they believe those are improving, governments survive. If they believe those are declining, governments fall. Simple as that. So where does that leave us? We are watching three simultaneous tensions. A governing party trying to maintain authority, an opposition right struggling to define itself, and a public increasingly impatient with both. That combination is combustible. But combustible doesn't always mean revolutionary. Sometimes it just means noisy, because for a true political realignment to occur, three things must happen: sustained organisation, clear policy direction, electoral viability. Momentum alone isn't enough. Social media engagement isn't enough. Online outrage isn't enough. Ballots decide outcomes, and participation decides ballots, which brings us back to where we started. Information matters, engagement matters, voting matters. You can criticise the system endlessly, you can mock politicians daily, but if you don't show up at the ballot box, someone else will, and they will shape the country, whether you like it or not. Now, is Britain on the brink of a political earthquake? Maybe. Or maybe this is just another wave in a long cycle of dissatisfaction. What's undeniable is this: trust is fragile, loyalty is shifting, and voters are restless. The next general election may not just be about who governs. It may be about what kind of politics survives. Is it cautious, managed and centrist? Or disruptive, blunt and confrontational? That choice won't be made on YouTube. It won't be made on X. It won't be made in comment sections. It will be made quietly, in polling booths. And when that moment comes, every vote will count. Because whether it's Restore Britain, Reform UK, Labour, or someone else entirely, the future of the country won't be decided by noise. And the real question isn't who's shouting the loudest. It's who's organised enough to win.